Hello everybody, I'm your host, Dr. Darkspawn, naturally, and today we're going to be looking at the final difficulty tier and the final video in the three-part series of how to build an outpost, addressing brutal difficulty outposts and, all the stats and etc. with them. I'll be doing it slightly different from the first two videos about normal and dangerous ones where they have more showcases. In this one I'll be having much less. I'll maybe only have one showcase somewhere at the end, but I will have a lot more examples from different bases that I've built in order to just show you how to do it differently each and every time. I will be showing two bases that build upon the ideas that were discussed previously in the normal and dangerous bases. These will be Osborn and Ashley Falls, and it focuses a bit on having a Killbox is set up on the beginning and a speedrunner trap directly after that, and filling the rest of the base with traps after that. I will also be addressing how to play with radar perception in a base called Lansdale, and I'll have a brutal base specifically focused on tricking the raider as well, called Lula. So I'll have chapters in this video. You can just skip to each one of those that you want to see. And yeah, I hope you watch all of them though, and that they're very informative. So how do we start a brutal outpost? What do we need? Well, in the burial grounds, specifically, you're going to want a burial ground that has a capacity of 4,500 and a extraction for GenMat, a passive extraction limit for GenMat of 9,000. For those that don't know, the 9,000 on the bottom on suits that I just chose here on Rose Lodge means that every 300 passively extracted GenMat, which is what the 9,000 number represents, passively extracted GenMat, every 300 of that value is equal to 48 minutes. And if you have 9,000 maximum passively extracted GenMat, that means your base has a lifetime of about 24 hours per prestige level. So the longer the base has a lifetime for each prestige level, the longer it is available in the matchmaking pool, the less you have to prestige it, and the less you have to worry about running out of prestige points. So now that you don't have to worry about prestige points, there are some other great options that you can also choose. Ones that do not have 9,000 passive GenMat extraction, but preferably you want one that always has 4,500 capacity for traps and blocks above. If you do choose one that has like 3,000 or 4,000 trap capacity, I would not recommend in doing so, as it can be woefully inefficient. The lower limit for brutals is the same as the upper limit for dangerous, roughly about 2,300 2,400 capacity of traps, which means that since there is no upper cap, why wouldn't you want something that allows you to put more traps in? You can choose bases that have 3,000 capacity or 4,000 capacity. Even if they both had 9,000 passive GenMat extraction on the bottom, they would still not be as efficient as a base that has both. Alright, so then let's hop into the first example of the bases, and we'll see what's up. Alright, so hopping into our first base, Ashley Falls, which is built upon the same concepts as described in the How to Build a Good Dangerous Outpost video. This utilizes a sort of like Killbox aspect with a great speedrunner trap at the back. It is not impossible to speedrun, as it didn't really focus on the speedrun but more upon the kill room over here, but it is very effective in catching speedrunners nonetheless. So for the entrance of this, it has a slanted entrance with multiple, well, kind of like bolt lures that tries to get the player to shoot their bolts at these plasma sentinels, as raiders do generally perceive plasma sentinels as a good threat. I would recommend using either cannonbacks or plasma sentinels as a lure to try and just force a few bolts out of the player as these can trigger infinitely. Cannonbacks can shoot as many bombs as they need, and plasma sentinels can shoot as many of the little red orbs that they send towards the raiders as well. So they're pretty good in applying pressure and trying to force the raider into the room ahead. I've got 2 hollow cubes above, which disguise the 2 hunter bolt shots above, which try and add even more pressure towards the players, and as you can see, they have been quite effective in catching the players that play really slow. This cannonback over here moves into this back corner. It's not really important that it stands on this block, but having guards behind the player, like these 2 cannonbacks above and grapples pointing towards where the raider enters the room, are also a good practice to have, with incinerators blocking off the entrance where the raiders enter. So in this room, if you were a raider entering, you would be, forced to use a bolt or 2 just to get into the room, if you're not trying to speedrun it, that is. And when you do get into it, the flamers above, the incinerators, cut off your way out, and if you stop, you see the fire coming down, and you hesitate for a moment, the iron claws grab you, and then they pull you into the incinerators and causes your death. The 2 cannonbacks over here both have deadman switch, and they're standing on a slanted block. So if, for example, a raider would bait out these 2 hunter bolt shots behind the 2 hollow cubes, and they took out 3 of the plasma sentinels, they could go over here and they would try and melee one of these guards. The guards would fall and they would roll down the slanted floor that they're standing on, and they would drop and fall onto the middle of this slanted block where I am standing right now, and effectively explode, forcing the players to retreat very fast or be hammered by a deadman switch mod on the guard. The floor here is set up to be quite deceptive. So in these concepts that I described earlier, that each one of these bases does focus on a bit of a concept, they do not exclusively need to use only this concept, and in making brutal bases I recommend that you use a combination of concepts. Play a little with the raider's perception, have a bit of a killbox, have a Spdtrap, definitely to catch any speedrunners. Play a little with it and try and trick the raider here and there just to see what you can get away with. There is so much freedom in a brutal base setup that there is no hard and fast way to make it actually be ineffective, but yeah, the more traps you have, the more effective they will be, because the more lines of sight intersect, as you can see. It already is quite difficult to think how just putting traps in a normal box can be bad and ineffective, but it is possible to do so just by spamming them on every block. So please, I would encourage you to use creative freedom when placing these and give them good thought, and not just have a massive corridor with every wall on the side and on the roof having traps. That is something that I'm seeing a lot of people do in Brutals, and these bases are extremely easy to do, and it might not be satisfying for you to see your base get run with 0 deaths the whole time with only 40 seconds on the replay. Right, but getting back to the base, as this is for the kill room, it's got multiple plasma sentinels which all cover the front entrance over here. Do make sure that they are in range, and try to have a secondary backup set of plasma sentinels towards the back of the player, like so, that can cover towards the front of the room. As you can see here, this is also within their aggro range. Do try and have some kind of incinerators pointing towards the entrance, preferably above the entrance and not in front of them like these 2 bolt shots, as traps that are generally in the front tend to get destroyed much easier and or skipped. And have some iron claws just forcing the player back into a specific hazard. This one over here is just if the player doing the speed run or is a bit slow, it catches them, it grabs them back this way into all the other hazards. Is that the one? No, that's not the one. That's okay, not highlighted anymore. Have some kind of trap that applies zoning. In this case, all of the plasma sentinels have zoning, all of the cannonbacks have great zoning, and force the raider into different parts of the room, and constantly having them see so many things on their screen that is very dangerous and can kill them instantly, is quite intensive for them to deal with. As for the speedrunner trap, afterwards, like, you have complete freedom in this. Have a trap, like, as you enter the speedrunner trap, have something pointing at the raider in case they stop here for a moment and they try and deal with anything in the speedrun trap. Make sure that there is at least one or two things pointing at them. In this case, the plasma sentinel above can shoot into this through this little hole here and hit the raider over here. The hunter bolt shot I have behind them can also hit them. The bombs are a great tool for forcing the raider to realize that they cannot skip a certain piece. They need to deal with it, and in dealing with it they get bombarded with all the other traps. I've also added a second pair of iron claws above that can grapple players through these corrosive cubes up until, I believe, here, which is where their line of sight ends, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they can grapple about a 45-degree angle, and if they're on this first block on the slope right here, it can still hit them. So have multiple traps doing multiple things, so that not only feed into the kill box itself and make the kill box more effective, but also make the speedrunner trap more effective. Now, in this case, the cannonbacks have so much use that they're pretty much the core of the room. The cannonbacks have so much zoning, they take a lot of the attention of the raider, and whatever the plasma sentinels cannot do, the cannonbacks will do. So yeah, have a kill box that kind of covers all aspects and feeds into the first two blocks of the speedrunner trap. In this specific case, I have a piston on the floor to try and help slow down, and this block over here, all of the traps at the back except the two iron claws and the traps on the side as you go past the killbox room, all feed into these two blocks, this block with the piston and this block on the ramp, making it so that if the raider trying to speedrun is slow for even a half of a second or a quarter of a second, they die to the traps and guards in the kill box itself, and if they're too fast, they get hammered by the piston's head. Now, in the speedrun trap, I have multiple pistons with a 5-block spaced Dragon's Breath incinerator trap, as shown before in the dangerous video. It's very great in sending just one jet of flame all the way down to the bottom. It's great especially in blocking melee attacks from reaching, so if someone was running double sword, a 5-block distance incinerator firing at max range will kill them as they hit it. And yeah, just some pistons to slow them down, give some of them blockade, take blockade off of some of them, and give the one in the middle a burning piston, just to add an extra layer of danger, as this one has to extend towards the side, walk up, and if you don't melee it but you try and shoot it but your gun's still on cooldown, you walk into it, the gun doesn't fire, and bam, you touch the burning piston part of the death piston and end up dying. The bomb trap up here has had some strange interactions with the death piston below. This death piston has extended and into this block, and the player went past the death piston extended, the bombs fell on top of the death piston and ended up bouncing off of the death piston into this block right here where the raider was standing watching it unfold. And as funny as it is, this was not intended, but it is a possibility that you can kind of think of. If they don't destroy all of the death pistons, some of your bombs will bounce off of the death pistons and go in a different trajectory. So please do keep that in mind when setting up a speed trap that utilizes bomb ejectors above. Alright, after the speed trap, kind of have one piston pointing towards the back of the player, as mentioned before in the dangerous little video as well. and maybe just something that body blocks a little bit, like a warmonger with a dead man switch that also applies a bit of zoning, and a backwards facing trap like a bolt shot would also be great here, another incinerator trap if you want. I chose to go with a bomb ejector to try and bounce the bombs onto these quarter pyramid blocks over here, forcing the bombs in multiple directions, up, down, and to the sides. It doesn't have a lot of horizontal reach forward towards the path that Harvey walks, but it does have a lot of reach around it and towards this section back, so if the player does retreat, it does capture them. For the cannon back above, the cannon back is just an extra distraction. It also has dead man switch, if I'm not mistaken. It does not have dead man switch. In fact, let's give it dead man switch. Right, so you'd have a cannon back over here, an added distraction, an added bomb to the mix, and just a trap behind it. If they slow down to shoot and melee the cannon back, for example, if they slow down at all at this point, they get shot from behind. If they slow down at this point at all, I have a trap pointing towards them as there as well. This incinerator trap hits this entire block, and I've used this exact same concept again in the next few blocks if they slow down for the cannon back. Yeah, that is pretty much the entire speedrun trap and the Killbox, and then any other capacity that I had left was used towards making the roof here corrosive and having one or two traps just creating a bit of a distraction. This one has eruption to try and discourage melee attacks after it fires down this long corridor. So for example, if the player was using 2 swords, the trap would activate. If they wouldn't reach it in time but instead baited the first time, a secondary explosion would trigger around this and make it unsafe for players to try and melee it. Not a lot of use in the eruption trap. It was a bit of a test that I was doing to just try and see how effective it would be, but it does not get a lot of kills, and it's more meant as a zoning tool rather than a tool that actually kills raiders. And then a backwards facing bomb trap with a incinerator just to bait them into this, going to this, shooting it or meleeing it, and then the bomb trap triggers from behind. No chaos on this. Chaos would have the bombs go too far, so it wouldn't cover close to the actual bomb ejector, so do keep that in mind. Some second wave going on here, but they're not actually 10 blocks away from the GenMed, so they're not as effective as they would like to be, but unfortunately there was a bit of a limit when building this in terms of capacity for blocks. But on the GenMed like this, if you have a GenMed open on the bottom, I would suggest putting a ramp, and at the top of the ramp putting a second wave bomb ejector, and having a hollow cube with 2 cannon backs with armor and deadman switch run onto the slant. If the cannonbacks die on the slant, they roll down the slant and explode on the player on the bottom, while the cannonback at the above gives more zoning. And if the player tries to deal with the second cannonback going into melee, the bomb ejector triggers and shoots bombs over this whole area, making it a very deadly 3-part trap with deadman switch on the cannonbacks, forcing the player out of the bottom corner, bombs forcing them out of the middle section, and armor on the cannonback and the bomb ejector at the back, forcing them out of the farther back section away from the GenMed, and also making it one trap leading into the next, and leading to death. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this example. Just a bit to recap. In this example, a lot more angles are covered. There are a lot more guards, especially cannonbacks that have deadman switch and leash, and a lot of more traps catching the player from behind, as would normally be found in a dangerous level outpost, for example. Have some extra backup traps. Make sure you cover every bit of this room in the line of sight of some or other type of trap, and have multiple of them feed into one another. Have multiple plasma sentinels feed into the cannonbacks, have multiple cannonbacks feed into the plasma sentinels, and have something to cut off the raiders' escape so that they're forced to engage with the room for at least a few seconds. I think incinerators fire for about 4 seconds, or maybe 5 seconds even. I wouldn't recommend giving them napalm, but you can give them napalm if you want. Try and give them dragon's breath. Make a long jet of flame that cuts this whole section off for the raider to retreat, and then punish them for retreating with a few traps, like another incinerator or a hunter bolt shot, for example, above, and have a few fallback traps, so in case somebody rushes through this really fast, have an extra pair of iron claws grabbing them from behind, and make sure that all your traps in the kill box feed into the first 2 blocks of the speedrunner trap. Yeah, that'll be it for this. Let's go into the next. Alrighty, hopping into the second example of the kind of kill box speedrunner trap setup that I have on Osborn. It utilizes Bloodlust Warmongers as well. In the beginning, they're kind of hidden here in this tube, and if you're going to use Bloodlust Warmongers or Warmongers coming from behind in general on a timer, I would recommend using the Gears decal, which makes a lot of noise and it looks very, well, uniform. Everything looks the same, they all turn the same way. It kind of plays a little with the player's perception, and as you can hear, they are quite loud, so hearing Warmonger footsteps from behind are going to be quite difficult if they're not already looking down the corridor. Now, these Warmongers, as I've said before, do have Bloodlust, which means that they rush to battle when they hear another guard in combat. So Bloodlust has a 12 block range in which guards can hear other guards in combat through walls, so this does not require line of sight. And if you are using Bloodlust, you also do not need to put your Warmongers on a timer, so they're more efficient and they're not as easy to predict where the Warmongers are coming from, you know, and where they're kind of hidden. So this cannonback over here, the first one that aggroes as the raiders come in, is going to trigger the Warmongers. This one here is also going to trigger them, so always have kind of a backup trigger cannonback in case the raiders kind of like peek like a millimeter around this and kill the cannonback before it aggroes. Bloodlust does require guard activation and will not work if there is no guard to activate them. Unfortunately, Bloodlust also doesn't work on like a chain trigger. You can have a guard standing on block 0, for example, and another guard standing on block 12. These two, the guard on block 0 aggroes, and then the guard on block 12 activates from Bloodlust. But if the guard on block 12 has another guard 12 blocks further away from that, it will not trigger Bloodlust. So chain triggering them like that does unfortunately not work, and it would have been very interesting, you know, to see how that would have worked and the ideas that would have come out of that. But yeah, it needs to be a direct combat with a guard in its normal range and not the result of a Bloodlust proc that does trigger any consecutive Bloodlust procs after that. Okay, so in this room, similar to Ashley Falls, it's got cannonbacks and it uses plasma sentinels. Now these plasma sentinels have plasma cloud in order to zone the player a bit better. Some of them have self-destruct and they do kind of cover like the whole room. This one does not have, it actually does have eagle eye, but it covers front to back. This one also has eagle eye, so that it can cover all the way to the entrance over here. It's important to cover the first 2 blocks as you're about to get vision of the kill box room, at least in some way, to try and put pressure on them. All 3 of these cannonbacks can shoot their bombs into this little hole right here. This is the last point, so if I was to be a raider and I would walk up this way and I would aggro them and I would walk downwards out of line of sight, the cannonbacks are going to fire at kind of a phantom of the player. If the player was standing here the last they were seen, the cannonbacks will shoot at the last seen spot that the player was at. And if the cannonbacks shoot the bombs in here, it rolls down the slant all the way down and can kill the player into the middle of this current block that I'm standing on. It's a bit odd that it can cross this 90-degree turn and explode somewhere on the edge of this block and roll down 2 blocks as well after it hits the first wall. These cannonbacks are crazy good for zoning, and they mess with the player's prediction of where the bombs will land because of the slant and how the momentum works of the bomb. When it hits something and it immediately goes on a slant, not all of the momentum is lost. It doesn't just go stand still and then start rolling. It hits and then it immediately starts rolling with half of the momentum that it had before. So that is quite effective. And if you take too long with it, the warmongers will reach you from behind. Just also to clarify, that phantom that I've mentioned before, from a guard activation, which is the last seen point, the Bloodlust Warmongers will use that as a point of reference. So the Bloodlust Warmongers, let's say that I walked up until this block and I activated all of these cannonbacks. If I walk 2 blocks back and my last seen point is over there, the Warmongers with Bloodlust activate and they run and up until the point where they can come in range to melee your last point that you were seen at. So they will walk up until like the top of this block, because that's the range where they can melee the last point where you were seen. So those are pretty good in order to circumvent the fact that warmongers from the back normally use a timer, and they can also mess with like the player's perception from what's going on with the base, what's going on with the design, and how devious you can pull these kinds of things off is going to determine how effective each one of these tactics are going to be. Now in this room I have 2 incinerators as well, pointed towards the entrance on different blocks to try and zone them in different ways. This one here is past a corrosive splatter cube, of which I have 2 here, just to have the cannonback bombs trigger splatter and throw splatter corrosive projectiles on the floor. These are 1 on top, 1 on the side, instead of 2 above, so that there's more of a coverage in terms of the flames that are used, so that it cuts off more of the escape. And it's not just reliant on 2 traps next to each other, which are very easy to take out. For example, if I wanted to take out both the incinerators above me, I would shoot one, grapple, and then once I'm above, I would melee the other one and then go about clearing the room. But because they're so far away from each other at like a 90-degree angle, it makes them much more difficult to remove. And the fact that these 2 Plasma Sentinels have coverage to the end of this room, up until the point where the Spdtrap room begins, is also great. So always keep that in mind when you make your base. Have 1 or 2 backup traps, as mentioned before. This Claw Trap and this Hunter Bolt Shot Trap are the 2 backup traps. To try and just kind of deal with players that aren't immediately zoned or killed by the Plasma Sentinels or the Cannonbacks. I have another one here just in case, you know, the player tries to really move around the room a lot without trying to deal with anything, and don't really try and, you know, use their bolts to take out certain things and instead try to melee them. These kinds of grapples are great for catching them off guard, as they can also pass through corrosives and through hollow cubes. I opted to put a floor hollow cube with picture perfect and a bomb trap underneath to like shower this area with bombs. I've got a quarter pyramid above that to spread the bombs throughout this whole section on the beginning of the speedrunner trap, and also put splatter on this corrosive, so when any of the bombs go through this corrosive cube, they trigger splatter corrosives to drop on the floor in the vicinity. It's also quite good for catching grenades. If the raider comes to the top and throws a grenade trying to catch the speedrunner trap, they want to hit it on this block and roll it forward, or they want to hit it on the block with the first piston and roll it past that. Depending on how well they throw it, it might hit the block above and just fall down, or it might fall into the hollow cube itself, and this could save the first part of the speedrun trap. Now, what's great about this as well is that there is a Plasma Sentinel above the entrance of the speedrun trap. If you go about roughly within half a block of a Plasma Sentinel, the moment it fires, you will be instantly killed by it. So anyone trying to speedrun this will activate the furthest back Plasma Sentinel roughly about here, because it also has vision of the middle of the block, past the quarter pyramid here in the middle, and it has about a 1.5 second spin up time. When you reach this point after about 1.5 seconds, it immediately shoots you and kills the raider if they have not dealt with this trap, forcing them to use a little bit of their time and a bit of their actions to deal with this. And this allows the incinerator, which has a deceptive activation range, to get them if the Plasma Sentinel does not. It also puts a cooldown on their gun and allows them to not as easily run through this section. As for the deceptive range of this incinerator trap, a lot of people would think that it starts on the first piston because there's no trap on this last block. Generally, when people place these kinds of traps, they make the raiders expect that all of these traps are kind of the same, that the incinerator goes as far as the pistons. This one activates one block sooner, and with that deceptive range can trick the raider in a sense that they won't be ready for how quickly the fire will actually begin shooting out of this. I've got some pistons with blockade, and I don't think any of them have burning piston. Actually, no burning pistons. Some of them, one or two of them have blockade, and the other ones are just normal. Then I've got one here on the side, just to kind of like temporarily block line of sight. I have a hunter bolt shot with a corrosive here to give the player a false sense of security when they get in here. And if the hunter bolt shot does miss, I have a warmonger that immediately aggroes the moment the player reaches this point on this block. So this will activate and shoot, and the warmonger will immediately after the bolts fire already be running towards where the player is. It has armor and deadman switch in order to just try and force the player out of this corner. And some of the cannonbacks here on the back, this one above, these ones below and to the sides, and this one here on this side that does not have leash, will run and stand on this point here on the bottom and fire their bombs down this corridor. And effectively then, because they don't have leash, these ones above will fire into the opening of the speedrunner trap, and the ones on the bottom will run all the way to the side and again fire to this last corner with their bombs, providing even more zoning and providing even more pressure, forcing the player into this bolt shot and warmonger with deadman switch at the front. Now, on the off chance that they kill this flamethrower trap, destroy this, and immediately go to the hunter bolt shot on maybe the 5th or 6th or 7th time that they reach this point, they shoot the hunter bolt shot, they go towards the warmonger, they kill the warmonger, its deadman switch triggers, and they panic, they move to the side, and then they fall into this pitfall trap. Very sneaky use of it, using a corner of a block beneath that is covered on top by a slanted block, meaning that only half of the bedrock portion of the hollow cube is exposed, and very deceivingly tricking the player that this doesn't really look like a place where a hollow cube would be. A very good use of a pitfall trap. Feel free to use it as you wish, but do know that pitfall traps have a very low consistency rate if they're not followed by some kind of pressure to force the enemy player into that. And dealing with pitfalls and the use of tricking the player into these kinds of things, you can see more of this when I show you the example of how Lula was built, which will be the final example in this video. Then I've just got kind of a impaler trap with self-destruct. It's also trying to help zone the player a bit forward, get them out of this corner. I have a few second wave impalers that also have self-destruct to add a bit of zoning, and I have another pitfall hollow over here, just because I thought it would be really funny to have a second one that, you know, some people can fall into and, you know, die to. I have something over here just to make it not feel as empty, so that the player doesn't really realize that a lot of capacity is actually missing from the base, which is being used in the final corridor of the base where the gen mat is. Now I have a trap on this side here on a slanted block and a hollow pitfall on the right again. So this trap, it faces this way. They kind of see the trap. They might shoot it from here, but there is also a chance that they look at this and they think, oh, I might miss if I shoot it with just this little bit sticking out on the side. Move to the right, and as they move to the right to try and get a better view of it, this activates. They fall. They don't realize that they fall. They might not shoot this in their panic, jump upwards, and then get killed by the bolts. Or if they do shoot it, they fall a bit too much, and then the impaler from the side hits them and sends them back to spawn. Now, for this last corridor, I also have a bit of a hidden section going up this way, which has got two blocks over there. This one looks like bedrock block because it has second wave on this corrosive, and I have a hollow here with picture perfect and another segment of bloodlust warmongers, and the final one in this has deadman switch. Now these ones trigger from the cannon backs. that are further above and the long corridor at the end. One of these cannon bags has optics and the other one has short leash to make sure that they stay here. These corrosives on top have splatter, which is a great zoning tool, especially in tight corridors such as these. The bomb shot by the cannon bags go through all of the corrosives. Attack if the player stands here on this last block, the bomb goes through all of these on the top and it leaves a massive trail of splatter corrosive cubes. Not really as effective as they would want to be, but if a player really wants to melee them, they don't have any bolts left, or they're not using any ranged weapons, then this is quite effective against them. These bombs also serve to force the player forward or force them backwards into this corner and down this ramp, and the cannon bag triggering the warmongers at the back. As if they get zoned once or twice, the massive gaggle of warmongers will run out of this kind of like block over here and hit them from behind. It's a great ambush, it works really well, and then that extra pressure, if they try and run away from the warmongers at the back, kill these two cannon bags, it causes the bomb traps above here to activate and the one behind them to activate as well, launching 24 bombs through these corrosive cubes, making a ocean of splatter projectiles for the corrosive cubes, so that the player cannot effectively jump and grapple through this without dying to splatter all the 24 bombs from above. Now these bombs do have, I'll call them splitters, so these are quarter pyramids with two angled sides. These bombs hit these angles and some of them goes through the gaps and go straight down, and other ones hit the top of these quarter pyramid blocks and roll, and then if you have a second one, it can also help split them even further to have them roll all the way to here. And this one up top, triggering over here, launches the bombs directly into this. They bounce, they go back through this topmost corrosive and fall this way, and should kill a player up until the point where this second wave piston starts. So if they don't immediately grapple out and dies to some of the splatter, if they don't, then yeah, they'll die to the bombs. If they do pick up the gen mat, this block behind them turns into a second wave plasma sentinel with self-destruct. This is great for countering people that use certain consumables like flash barrier, and if you were to throw a flash barrier down here and you were to destroy this plasma sentinel, then the plasma sentinel would create half a block up until just past the middle of this gen mat, where, you know, just this round part here in the bottom begins. It would create a red AoE, the same as the plasma projectiles that do kill the player if they stand in it for too long. And yeah, that's just a slightly different way of doing a kind of like a Killbox mechanic and an anti-speedrunner trap, in a way where a lot more of the Killbox itself does cover the anti-speedrunner bit, and that the anti-speedrunner bit does do a bit of deception with like a bolt shot shooting through this corrosive, and a dead man switch warmonger in here. You know, if you want, you can also give some of the guards in this dead man switch. Oh yeah, something very important that I forgot to mention is that when using cannon bags in a situation like this, you do not want the cannon bags on that are behind the player and in front of the player to be moving anywhere. They need to have one block that they're standing on to move on, and nothing more than that. If they're able to move more than that, that means you need to remove one of their mod slots and give them the short leash mod. Otherwise, they all end up running towards the point where they last saw the player. Around the corner, they're going to try and run to get vision on the player on the bottom, and then subsequently get killed by the player, and, you know, effectively only be good for the first shot that they shoot and be useless afterwards, because they're going to be running away from where they're covering all the other traps are covering them. And, you know, essentially it'd be a waste of capacity to do something like that. So always try and give them one block to stand on, and put them in such a spot where they get maximum view of the player. Like this one standing on the edge of this block to see the player move, this one standing over here so they're not in the corner and they see the player if they speedrun. These ones actually don't really need to face in a different direction because they are already facing towards the player, and this one just needs to face in a slightly different direction. Aiming forward, I just aimed it towards the right so that they can detect the player on the bottom. yeah, using something like this, so maybe a combination of something like Ashley Falls, for example, you can make an extremely effective version of a Killbox plus Spdtrap that has a lot more traps covering it and is a lot more deadly. So let's head on to the third example then. Right, for the third example, we're going to be focusing on a base that utilizes playing with radar perception. Specifically, what they can see and how they're going to react to what they see. It involves quite a fair bit of trickery, but primarily involves the perception of the player. This is just a troll piston that actually kills quite a lot of people. Somehow, a bunch of people have died to this death piston because they get impatient and then they try and rush, and this is perfectly timed. If you were to grapple jump as effectively as you can and reach this point, do not deal with this death piston, it will hit you from above. So it's just a bit of a lull at the front, but it has actually gotten quite a fair share of kills. Right, so for this, with playing for perception, the first thing that we're going to work on with is threat assessment. So a player walks into this, they see a lot of plasma sentinels and cannonbacks, very similar to Osborn, but from above. So in this case, they look much more intimidating. They can shoot all the way down to the bottom of this block and create an AoE that covers to halfway onto this bedrock block. So it's got fair bit of zoning, and then the cannonbacks, that cannonback there, on top, as well as the cannonback on the left and the one on top of the one right in front of the pathway that Harvey walks, do all shoot down here, and one of the bombs, I think from the one far in the corner over there, can roll all up until here and kill the player up until this point. Right, so they're very oppressive and they don't really allow you to get a good look of the room, and we're going to take advantages of this because it reduces the range of their perception, and then it makes them realize that there's a lot of stuff here on the right side. We do not want to go to the right side, and in so doing end up going towards the left, and almost all of the players end up grappling towards these walls here on the side. Seeing the grapple, they try and just panic and go past it towards this point, in which case all of the other plasma sentinels and cannonbacks will start firing upon them on this room. So in the beginning, we want them to see there's a lot of danger towards the right, and there's some danger really far back towards the left. So the safest place for them to be would be to go upwards towards this left corner, and we accommodate for that by having a hunter bolt shot, which can the bolts can turn about 1.5 blocks away from the center of its flight path, so they can shoot up until roughly about right here on top of this block, and roughly about here on the middle of this slanted block, depending on which way the player goes. They can also go upwards and shoot up until roughly here, or the top two left bolts can reach up until this point. Holocube is just there to remove some of the vision that they'll have, to kind of hide the specific set of grapples above, and to distract them as they're hearing a grapple, their grapple triggering a holocube, or they're moving triggering a holocube, like, oh, there's danger behind me, there's danger to my left, I need to keep going forward or I'm going to die. The plasmas in this are set up quite effectively to all cover as much of this room as they can in their lines of sight. So they're pretty well set up and don't really allow a lot of freedom for the player at all. These plasmas are great. They serve as platforms for the cannonbacks and make it so that the cannonbacks are always at kind of a fixed position, and kind of the crux of this whole room is that these cannonbacks and these plasma sentinels would normally not be nearly as effective if the room layout wasn't as disgusting as it is right now. So I'm going to follow Harvey's path. So from the entrance, Harvey goes over these quarter pyramid blocks, he goes down, he goes over these slants, he walks across these 3 quarter pyramid blocks, goes around lots of glass blocks in between, blocking line of sight of the player so they cannot see Harvey move. Harvey moves down and he moves right next to the entrance. He moves down on the bottom, past these pistons. He moves along the wall of the room, which is not what they would expect Harvey to do. Moving across the wall, moves across these pistons, moves across the wall on the opposite end of the room, also very hidden, not very obvious whenever you're looking at this while raiding. Moves across this, moves along the left edge of the room, goes upwards, down again, across two more of these quarter pyramids, and down into the far right corner of the base. So just looking at that entrance, it is extremely difficult to tell that firstly is the exit, and while you're going in this, the only thing you're going to be seeing is a ocean of red projectiles from the plasma sentinels and bombs from every direction just getting lobbed at you. Now, in keeping with the players are going towards the left, a lot of these ramps are set up in such a way where if, for example, the player was to grapple along this bottom side, the cannonbag from the back would shoot the bomb onto this ramp, and the ramp would hold its momentum and it would roll forward like this and explode here in the back corner. The downwards part of the ramp doesn't really have too much of an effect, as the forward rolling momentum of it will carry it all along the wall. So that is why all of these walls, all of these places where the player will grapple to, have a lot of these walls that kind of make the cannonbag bombs roll in the direction that the player was moving. The cannonbag shoots at the player going that way towards the right at the end of the room. The bomb hits over here and the bomb rolls this way, and it rolls to this wall and rolls halfway up this block to explode over here. Very deceptive, and making all of the cannonbag bombs actually roll a lot and become very far-reaching in their nature. If you get shot at, the bomb will roll somewhere, it will bounce on a quarter pyramid block and it will roll into a hole, or it'll hit one of these sideways quarter pyramid blocks like on the top, and it will bounce all the way up until here and then explode here. Meaning that the more you run around this room, the more bombs fill this room, the more bombs fill this room, the more they'll bounce, the more they'll roll into places you least expect, and the more you'll find yourself reaching certain parts of the room that kind of just collect all these bombs because of how the floors are placed. A lot of the floors, like these slants on the bottom, these slants over here, if this cannonbag was to shoot down the bottom, the bomb would hit on this bottom of the slant, go upwards, and it would fall down here in the middle. Or if it was going to shoot from here onto the middle, it would kind of hit here, hit this block on the bottom, and roll into this corner, and just reach like really odd places and zone the player to such an extent where anywhere where they move, at least one bomb will bounce in their direction, one bomb will go towards the position they're moving, one bomb will be on them, and another bomb will be close to where they think they might want to retreat to if they see that their paths are being completely blocked off. Now, some of these do also have dead man switch. If they get killed by any of the other cannonbags, which is highly unlikely for some of these. This one in particular I think dies quite a lot because it's standing in a spot where if a player grapples around the left side of the room from the entrance, they grapple towards this point generally, and sometimes get killed because they go within half a block of this plasma sentinel. They grapple along the top here, grapple here, they see this, and then they grapple along the bottom, which this hole here at the back is a really great bait. As I mentioned before, all these cannonbags shoot onto this slanted block and they roll forward on the slant and kind of collect in this corner. Some of the bombs can like reach and hit the front of the sentinel, fall to the bottom here and detonate on this point, killing this cannonbag above. So if cannonbags are at certain spots where they generally tend to die, like that corner and this corner over here, which has a quarter pyramid that can catch some bombs at the back on top of the slant, I would give them dead man switch to just, add another explosion, add something else that the player needs to keep track of. But generally, if you're going to be using a design like this, all of the cannonbags need fire rate and armor if they're standing on top of the plasma sentinels, And if they're not standing on top of the plasma sentinels, try and give some of them armor, but mix it up with a dead man switch here and there, just to throw the player for a loop and get them to be confused as to what's really going on. Now, the pistons on the floor here are kind of set up in a way that you hear the sound of the pistons from where you are standing right here in the front. I can test the show. Right, as you can hear, the pistons towards the left of the room immediately grab your attention, and you're thinking, oh, it's got to be somewhere to the left, right? All of this red comes at you. What's happening? What's happening? There are so many bombs. Oh no, I don't want to go there. I go into this hole, and one of the bombs that got shot at me actually hit the top of the plasma sentinel and rolled off of the top of the plasma sentinel onto the block that I went towards. Now, just try and show how the bombs are kind of like rolling through the zone. You can see a lot of the bombs hit the side of the slant and then roll towards where I am in the corner. So it's great to have a kind of setup like that. It messes with, you know, the player's perception of, I have no idea where to go into this room, and when I'm going into this room, I have no idea where the bombs are gonna go. They have no way to predict anything, and it is absolute chaos. And in a situation like this, a lot of players will kind of just hit their head against the same wall the whole time until they kind of get lucky and either think they found an exit, like following the pistons. Ah, this looks like an exit, and then it's a glass block, there's no exit, and all the bombs are coming from them. You know, the plasma sentinels are shooting at them, and they simply die. It's great to use something like these pistons. As you can see, I've went a bit over 4500 capacity for this one, but it was exactly on 4500 capacity after placing the pistons as a secondary measure that also increases the odds of them going towards the correct or the wrong direction. And yeah, I would say a lot of these are deceptively placed. This plasma sentinel is placed close enough so that, you know, it appears threatening from the top right, but if you were to try and jump towards the right, knowing that the exit is there, you would go within half a block of this plasma sentinel after it activates, and if you didn't kill it, it will hit you right on the spot, and, you know, it forces you to take care of it. If you don't, you die as you go past it. That is for the deceptive part. That is okay. I just have a few bomb ejectors here to try and like force the player forward. If they go forward, there's a bomb ejector and a hunter bolt shot in front. One of them will, I think if you walk towards this one at the front, you can kill it rather easy enough without the bombs actually killing you going around the corner. These are just some kind of panic traps depending on what the player does. And for this section, it just has a single incinerator reaching one block past the pistons, and some grapples on the side, one grapple on the one side and one hunter bolt shot on the other one with double down. That should hit hunter, my apologies, shooting through the corrosives. The hunter on the right side has a different timing of the grapple on the left, meaning that if they don't have a maximum upgraded melee weapon, they get grabbed by the one or get killed by the other, as they have different timings and their projectiles both go through the corrosive cubes. And then just two incinerator traps on the side, so in case they get rid of the bolts first, which will be the first thing to reach the player, immediately afterwards they get grabbed by the grapple into the flamethrower trap. And yeah, besides that, there's nothing really much going on. There's not a lot of extra capacity that the space has to use, but it uses a specific concept in playing with player perception really well, in that if you do not know where the exit is of a room, whatever kill room you have becomes at least 5 times deadlier. And, you know, adding a few corrosive blocks with opaque to like really splash a bit of color on the raider's screen so that they can see that's not where I want to go, that's not where I'm going to go. Subconsciously, they're going to stay away from this side and immediately go towards where they think the least amount of traps is, which is towards the left. And as I've stated before, you know, this is a massive bait. It uses so many psychological tricks and factors that you know, if you get here, wherever you go in the rest of the room, once you're inside of it, you have to go forward. And since you have to go forward, all the bombs are going to come at you, and you will get funneled into certain parts of this room that kind of collect a lot of the bombs, and eventually you will die. Something else that also works really well with this is the fact that cannonback bombs that hit a player directly obtain the momentum of that player in whatever direction they're moving. So if it hits me and I move backwards, it'll kind of roll because I was in its way and its momentum still lingers for a little bit. But if it hits me and I move in the way that it came from, in front of me for example, it will get stuck on my feet and roll with me and end up killing me as well. So yeah, I hope this design, this kind of idea, with a lot of quarter pyramids facing different ways, having like little corners, little pockets that appear to be safe but are not, having pistons to distract the player, having a trap here and there as kind of a backup trap just in case players move in like really unorthodox ways, can be really great in catching out certain players. Using some hollows here and there, using iron claws to displace the player and bring them to the left side of the room, especially where, you know, I want them to stay on the left side of the room and not try to go out, because that's where those are where all the projectiles are coming from. All the bombs and stuff and projectiles are coming from the right, so why would you go there? Just keep going towards the left and run around the room. And, you know, that's exactly what I want them to think. They need to see danger all along one side, go towards one side, get baited. So using a similar concept to this, mess up the floor a bit, give it a bunch of weird textures, make Harvey's path like really strange, make Harvey's path be super difficult to follow. Use these red glass blocks, they're exceptionally great for this, as it makes it even more difficult for them to kind of see where, you know, they're going, and even more difficult to track where Harvey is going. Harvey walks across this whole room, I think, 3 times, and in the 4th time that he walks in a different direction, he actually just leaves the room through some glass blocks that are very difficult to spot. I know that there is a few ways to get around this, like you can grapple to this point over here and just die over here, and then in your death screen watch Harvey go, but 99% of players will not know that you can do this and will not do this. This is especially great against duos. Make sure that the cannonbacks always face towards the entrance and that the bombs have enough momentum or slanted blocks on the top so that the bombs can roll all this way, or make sure that at least one of the cannonbacks, like that one over there at the far back, does have a really good line of sight into the farthest back corner. It's effectively increasing the reach and, you know, making the player feel like they're really boxed in and cramped in this little hallway, and psychologically forcing them, like, I need to go into this room because I cannot stay in here. There's too many things that zone me. I need to go in. And, you know, force them to engage with the room, force them to like try again until they eventually somehow get lucky and either clear the whole room or find the exit, which is actually really well hidden on like a very strange spot. Like, choose where your exit's going to be. I wouldn't make it directly in front. A lot of players seem to, you know, if they don't know where to go, they'll either go towards straight in the front and try and test things there, see what's directly ahead of them, or try to go for the 4 corners especially. Now, going for these corners, you see these kinds of things here. They'll try to stay away from the floor and actually try to preferentially grapple towards the roof or blocks that are behind guards, because they kind of perceive those as to be slightly safer. So do keep that in mind if building another room like this. So yeah, let's head on to the last example of Lula. Alright, the 4th example, Lula, will primarily deal with ways to try and trick the raider and use a combination of other traps and tools that were shown in the previous 3 examples, though to differing extents. Heading into this, the arrows on these blocks around the side actually lead the player into a hole here that they cannot get out of. If they grapple into this hole on the bottom, they cannot get out of the setup. It's pretty disgusting, and it turns into kind of a one-way doorway. I would recommend putting a 3rd slant on the other side so they cannot exit it as easily. That makes it a really effective trap to keep the player in this box. I have a spike trap here on this corner, as you can see there, with the spikes extending out of the yellow wall directly beneath me, a guard in front, and 2 plasma sentinels with plasma cloud mod on them that can both shoot into this hole here on the bottom. Then I just have a hollow over here that catches grenades, any grenades that come towards this guard and these two plasma sentinels through this hole, kind of just get caught over there and don't get rid of it. I have it's kind of like a budget zoning setup, since this isn't what the base is built around. These two plasma sentinels make AoEs, and the enforcer standing at the back. Yes, they are great for like shooting in this corridor. This one has a leash, so it doesn't move really far away. And this block over here provides a cover. And the whole idea behind tricking the player behind this is to make them go, oh yikes, there's a lot of things shooting at me here, I should take cover over here. And when they do, they fall into the pitfall, and the spike trap with self-destruct and blockade triggers on the bottom, and an incinerator pointing directly upwards hits them in case they fall down and panic jump upwards and grapple on this block. Then the incinerator will take care of them. If they do go down, they hit the incinerator, then the impaler from behind will trigger, and if they do kill it, it explodes after a few seconds, forcing them to jump out of the hole and into the plasma clouds left by the plasma sentinels and the enforcer shooting them from the front. Now, using these splatter corrosives above as well, I try to take the eye of the player towards the front, and the plasma sentinels, like, they're shooting at these, they're dealing with them, and they're not really looking behind them towards the right, in which I put a chaos bomb ejector. So these two traps and the one guard serve to draw the attention and trick the player into like constantly looking in this direction. And if they look up like this, they don't see any trap above there on that block. They might not notice that there's a trap behind them. These bombs kind of just like shoot out and they bounce throughout this whole section. I've put a few pistons on the back of this as a bit of a speedrun trap, with a roof hollow cube and a roof chaos bomb ejector past the hollow cube, and an incinerator facing down the hallway that also has eruption, trying to just make sure that it's not as easy to melee this after it fires, and prevent people from just baiting it out and then speedrunning it. I also have another pitfall here on the right, so if people try to walk to the right, these pistons do not reach this whole square, and there is a bit of leeway towards the right side here, so in case they want to walk around these pistons, they fall into this pitfall and get hit with the impaler from behind. So it also uses, again like in Osborn, the slanted block covering half of the hollow cube as a really great catch for pitfall traps. This is a second wave bolt shot facing towards the exit, so when they're exiting this, they're not looking. See, it's very difficult to see the bolt shot here on the right if you're moving, and they move this way. The bolt shot triggers, and it can shoot all the way, I believe, onto this hollow cube, and it can even curve around these blocks up and even hit the side of this plasma sentinel right here on the front. So it has very great reach and catches somebody that's just grappling out, grapple up until this point, and then right here you get killed by the hunter bolt shot activating from behind. Right, so then I've just got, one or two traps in front of them. This one I believe has napalm, yes, so that it lights this side of the block on fire, and it's not really very effective, but it does serve to trick the player into thinking that your traps are placed in a certain way. Before this, I had a hollow cube above with a bomb ejector on the roof facing downwards, so if you would go into this and you would melee it, this bomb ejector would activate, but the bombs kept going down this corridor and destroying the impaler here on top, and wasn't nearly as effective as I wanted them to be, since the incinerator on the opposite end already does the job of zoning the player after they make it to this point by activating and forcing them to come back into this corner. Although it would probably be a good idea to put a hollow cube here with a bomb ejector on top, so that as they do this and they hit that, the bombs drop from the back and the incinerator from the front does hit them. If I had more capacity, I would do that, but unfortunately I am currently on cap, so that is an idea. Have an incinerator at the front with like very short block range in between, so that they immediately feel that they can safely kill this and deal with it, and then have a on the cube that they were standing on to just see it. You would have a hollow cube above with the bomb ejector facing straight down. That will definitely catch quite a few players. So on this piston has blockade and burning piston, so it's very red, it's very colored, and pulls a lot of attention towards the specific piston, and the fact that there's a decal on the floor in one of these lights counts as a accessory or a decal. It does kind of distract a lot from the impaler behind that has unrelenting and blockade. So this activates and it'll stay activated. So if they were to rush, for example, past this, kill this piston, go down this way, hit that, realize, or hit one of these and realize they can't go back, there's a wall of spikes that's extended, and if they walk into it, they immediately die. This one is max range on 5 blocks with Dragon's Breath and Napalm to try and cover this back block in fire, so that if the player walks, I think, a quarter of a block in the range of the fire, they do still get damaged by it, and if they stay in it long enough, they will die. Just a standard local kind of speedrun trap going on here, with 2 in Warmongers at the opposite end to try and body block any speedrunners going forward. I do think that they have, yeah, they just have armor, they don't have any attack rate mods, but I would definitely give one of them Deadman Switch, and the other one I would give an attack rate upgrade, just to make them more consistent in dealing with players. On the one up here, they're looking at a lot of the decals, they don't really see the trap here. This trap triggers, it shoots bombs, and I think it will hit them up until this point over here, this open hole on the slanted ramp. A lot of the bombs that get shot here hop into this corner, and then it would actually be better to have a slanted block like so to try and make the bombs hop more to the left. In fact, I might actually do that after this, but it'd be more effective to have a slanted block over there to try and force the bombs further down the corridor, and further down this corridor. This corridor is fine with bomb reach, but this is more to catch like fleeing raiders. If, however, they do come up here and they shoot that one, knowing that it's there, move forward or grapple to try and reach this, I have a bolt shot at the back, tricking them into thinking that, it's probably the only trap that was here. Shoot it, they don't see a trap on that block, they grapple in to get this and get shot with a bolt shot from the back. A fair bit of deception on this one, since it's not always there, and the bombs can sometimes destroy it, involving a layer where the trap kills the other trap behind it, so you don't think that there's a second trap every other time that you die and come back to this point. Right. Second wave, roof bomb ejector again, very effective in this particular corner, as there's a ramp down here and some kind of trap as well to bait them towards this way where most of the bombs will be rolling towards. For this part, I didn't really have a lot of capacity remaining after building the pathway, so I just put a incinerator here with no mods as a bit of bait, and then an incinerator above, a hollow cube on the right with hunter bolt shot at the far back over here, just to have 1-2 traps activate, and a hollow cube on the right, and a second wave bolt shot on this one that's not activating. So just 3 traps in this large open room. It also serves to make the player think like, is there something going to be in this room? Is there something? Why is there so much space? To just try and trick the player into thinking that there's going to be a lot going on here, and it'll occupy a bit of their thought process for a little bit, when in fact the only thing that is in here is the second wave bolt shot hitting them from behind. So if you were to rush out after getting a gen mat, you would grapple to here, and you would grapple to here, and then get killed by the bolt shot if you did not deal with it. So yeah, have long hallways every now and then to just make the player think like, ooh, something ominous is coming up ahead, or a lot of the traps would be second wave in this room, or however they think. It's going to be wrong, because your plan is so much better and so much different. I have second wave on... This one doesn't have second wave. I still have to buy second wave and put second wave on this grapple. But I have multiple hollow cubes in here with second wave to try and falsify that there is naturally occurring bedrock inside this space, all to just cover this one cube of bedrock, or well, this hollow cube that presents itself as bedrock, to have a slant and bloodless warmongers coming from behind. Same as in Osborn, it utilizes the same concept, but this has multiple bedrock blocks that kind of do not activate when the player walks to them. They can hit them, they can shoot them, and they'll realize that they're fake, all to try and just disguise the fact that naturally occurring bedrock here isn't actually here. Or well, that it is here, but it's a jest. It's a jest. So yeah, that hides that block pretty well and allows the warmongers to not be found as easily. It also makes the path one block longer, so they don't run into this corridor when all the bombs are still, going off down here. So once the players walk down to this point, the two cannonbacks, as in Osborn, will, with their optic mod, enter combat and cause these warmongers to start running around the back, run through the hollow cube here, around this corner, not through this hollow cube. I think they might actually run through the hollow cube, but they'll run this way and they'll assault them from behind. Well, all of them with armor, and the last one with dead men switch. As with Osborn as well, there are multiple grenade traps that intersect, so if the warmongers from behind pressure them into this kind of corridor, the 24 bombs will activate. They'll drop an ocean of corrosive globs on the floor. The bombs will reach all the way to the gen mat, and the second wave self-destruct plasma sentinel at the end of the hallway will activate, and it will either shoot the player if they're not looking this way, or if they kill this, it will create like 2/3 of a block covered by a radiation explosion from the plasma sentinel, forcing them to move forward into either the corrosive globs onto the floor, or the bombs further ahead, or the warmongers, actually. Which one did I have active? This one. Or the warmongers still coming down the corridor. Yeah, that's all I have for the examples. With what you have left, you can add some second wave sprinkles on top of it. With the two hunter bolt shots, very effective, especially when there's a lot of like empty in between and there's not a lot of traps going on. Put a trap facing towards, the exit where the player comes back from the gen mat, and hunter bolt shots are very effective in that regard, but make the pathway that the hunter bolt shot can shoot through quite open so that the bolts can track the player really well. Yeah, I think that's it for the final example. So I'll hop into one showcase now, and yeah, we'll see how effective some of these traps are. Alrighty, that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say and do in this video. People running brutals are generally either those that want the most amount of resources in the shortest amount of time, or trying to farm some rank points, or just really want a good challenge. So I hope that these examples that I've shown, as well as the showcase, have been very enlightening in the information that they have provided, that they give you some idea of the concepts that can be applied to make a good brutal base, instead of just having all of this capacity and putting a trap on every side of a block. There are some really effective and efficient ways to do this, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't done so already, please consider leaving a subscribe and a follow on it, and if you want to see any other content like this for future in Meet Your Maker, please let me know in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. And yeah, I've been Dr. Darkspawn, you've been fantastic, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.